At least 9 people have died in the latest wave of Russian missile strikes, which hit residential areas and key infrastructure across the country. Protesters in Tbilisi take to the streets for the 3rd day in a row, despite securing major concessions from the government over the controversial Foreign Agents Bill.
Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni unveils plans to crack down on people smugglers, with penalties of up to 30 years in prison.
One of Europe's largest consumer organisations calls for a ban on food and drink labels that claim to be CO2 neutral.
At least 9 people have died in the latest wave of Russian missile strikes on Ukraine during the early hours of Thursday morning. It was the heaviest aerial bombardment in weeks, with at least 81 Russian missiles and 8 suicide drones striking residential areas and key infrastructure across the country.
Бешеный свист, потом бах, опять свист, бах. Ну, прямо 5-й этаж живем, как раз нет у нас чердака. Это было очень страшно. Мы собрали вещи и сбежали сюда на первый этаж, потому что это было таких прилетов.
Elsewhere, shelling hit residential areas of the country's capital, Kyiv, where 15% of homes were left without electricity and 40% without heating. Alerts were also raised at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which was cut off from the power grid. Although the current was eventually restored, the director of the UN's nuclear watchdog said such complacency cannot continue.
How can we sit here in this room this morning and allow this to happen? This cannot go on. I am astonished by the complacency. Yes, the complacency. What are we doing to prevent this from happening?
The Kremlin's defense spokesperson confirmed that Moscow had fired Kintal hypersonic missiles and that the strikes were retaliation for a so-called terrorist attack on Russian territory. Protesters in Tbilisi rallied for the 3rd day in a row on Thursday evening, despite securing major concessions from the government. The Interior Ministry promised to release all those detained during the demonstrations, and the ruling party agreed to withdraw its controversial Foreign Agents Bill. Georgia's president spoke out in support of the protesters and said distrust of the government was natural.
თუ ჩვენ ვართ დემოკრატიული ქვეყანა, დემოკრატიულ ქვეყანაში არ შეიძლება რომ მთავრობამ და პარლამენტმა არ გაითვალისწინოს ხალხის ხმა, ხალხის ნება.
The president previously promised to veto a bill that introduces a foreign agents label for NGOs and media organisations who receive money from abroad. Protest leaders say the rallies will continue until the bill is totally abandoned, while some are also calling for the government to resign.
Three people have died after a tunnel collapsed in a potash mine in the Spanish province of Catalonia. 2 geology students and 1 mine worker were buried at a depth of 900 meters, despite frantic attempts to free them. The president of the government of Catalonia confirmed the news.
Malauradament, avui hem de confirmar la mort de 3 joves mentre estàvem fent tasques a la mina i, per tant, en aquest sentit, el primer que volem traslladar és el condol a les seves famílies. Es tracta de 3 joves del voltant de la trentena i volem traslladar el condol a les seves famílies i també a tots els companys treballadors de l'empresa.
The Catalan regional government has opened an investigation to find out how the accident happened. Authorities recently inspected the mine and recorded no irregularities. However, it's not the first time tragedy has struck this particular mine. In 2013, 2 workers died in a landslide.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says her cabinet wants to establish a new law that would punish people smuggling by up to 30 years in prison. Meloni made the announcement in the town of Cutro near the beach where a migrant boat sank last month, killing at least 72 people.
Io penso che il modo migliore per onorare queste vittime sia fare quello che si può fare perché queste tragedie non abbiano a ripetersi. Allora noi abbiamo licenziato in questo Consiglio dei Ministri un decreto legge che affronta questa materia e lo abbiamo fatto per ribadire che noi siamo determinati a sconfiggere la tratta di esseri umani responsabile di questa tragedia.
On Sunday, local residents held a procession in honor of those who died, many of whom had fled Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran and Syria, hoping to join family members in Europe. The cabinet decree must be passed into law by Parliament, where Maloney's right-wing coalition holds a comfortable majority.
Do the UK's plans to crack down on illegal immigration comply with international law? That's the key question for the EU, after the UN Refugee Agency said London's proposal to reject asylum seekers who enter the country illegally would clearly breach international law. The EU's Home Affairs Commissioner echoed these concerns after speaking with her British counterpart, Suella Braverman.
My immediate reaction is I question whether this is in line with international obligations. She promised me it is, so let's hope she's right, but we have to examine it a little bit further.
France, which works closely with the UK on the issue, is also wary of the proposal.
Il ne faut pas qu'il y ait de conséquences négatives sur notre relation bilatérale, mais je suis sûr que de façon très constructive, nous saurons trouver les voies et les moyens de la conséquence de leur législation.
But the British plan has found some sympathy in Austria.
Die Diskussion in Großbritannien zeigt ja, dass der Druck auf Europa immer stärker wird, was illegale Migration betrifft, was Asylmissbrauch betrifft. Wir müssen uns in Europa auf unsere Themen konzentrieren.
In recent years, thousands of people have crossed the English Channel from France in often extremely small and dangerous boats, seeking a new life in Britain. The Conservative government has long promised to tackle illegal arrivals and is under growing domestic pressure to act. It's likely that Europe will have enough gas to make it through this winter, but the next one is more uncertain due to continuing supply problems. As a result, the EU will propose extending a 15% voluntary gas consumption reduction that member states agreed last year, as well as merging Ukraine into Europe's energy market.
We have integrated Ukraine in the gas joint purchasing platform with a view to help secure 2 billion cubic meters of additional gas. And we are working on market reforms in the context of the accession process.
The Energy Commissioner also denounced Russia's occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the director of the International Energy Agency has asked Europe to reflect on its dependence on Russian gas.
This is a huge strategic mistake, and many of us are paying it, not only with the electricity and gas bills, but much beyond that.
He also warned MEPs that whatever happens in Ukraine, energy will never again be as cheap as it was before the war. As a result, European industry may be at a disadvantage in the global marketplace.
Food and drink producers are greenwashing their products by classifying them as CO2 neutral and must be banned. That's according to one of Europe's leading consumer NGOs. The European Consumer Organisation says that small greenwashing labels are becoming increasingly common on the shelves of supermarkets, as more and more brands are discreetly stating that the product on sale is climate neutral and therefore good for the planet.
For us, this is absolutely greenwashing. Having 100% CO2 neutral on a product is scientifically inaccurate and misleading to consumers. There's no way for consumers in the supermarket to verify that this is using carbon sequestration projects to justify this claim.
The NGO also says that the justification used by food companies to claim products as CO2 neutral is not valid and that they're using so-called carbon offsetting.
I'm sure companies will pay for a carbon credit to balance out their own carbon emissions. The problem with this is that it's kind of a burn now, pay later approach. So They are emitting carbon right now, and then the pledges are for tree planting projects mostly in the future.
As a result, this compensation can take years to really be effective and isn't even guaranteed. Fires and extreme weather events could also cause these compensatory trees to disappear. For the European Consumer Organisation, these labels are a misleading indication that have a marketing value which companies play on. It says that more than half of European consumers believe that environmental issues influence their own food choices. That's why they're calling for a ban on these type of labels.
With full pomp and ceremony, Petr Pavel, the Czech Republic's new president, arrived at Prague Castle. The former retired army general and NATO official beat populist billionaire Andrej Babiš in an election in January. The ceremony was attended by members of parliament, senators, diplomats and representatives of foreign delegations. The role is largely ceremonial, but it has agenda-setting importance. Pavel received almost 60% of the vote, the best result of any presidential candidate in the history of the country. He replaces Miloš Zeman, who had been in office since 2013. He was a controversial head of state, with critics saying he divided the nation with his pro-Russian and pro-Chinese leanings. Pavel's election is expected to cement the country's Western orientation, and he's promised to help heal the nation's deep political divides.